Ross Ramsey is for the vacationing Evan Smith with the Texas Tribune. Ross joins us from the state capitol. Ross, tell me about the governor's shift on the rainy day fund.
Well, he initially said he didn't want to use it. He said he wanted the House and the Senate to look at everything else before they talked about the rainy day fund. The current budget has a deficit in it, so the House and Senate came back and said, we got to solve this current deficit. There's not enough time left in the budget to make cuts that would cover it, so we're going to have to use a rainy day fund now. So Perry came in and said, okay, you can use this much of the rainy day fund, but I'm not going to sign off on using any of it for the next budget.
So what we're talking about is just using about, what, $3.5 billion of it, of the $9 billion, just to cover expenses in the current biennium.
Right, and it leaves about $6 billion in the hole. So you get this prospect at the end of a session of saying, we're going to cut these programs, but we do have $6 billion in the bank.
But what the governor said was that if you try and use any of that money to balance the budget for the next biennium, for the next 2 years, I won't sign that legislation.
Right.
And does that mean he's going to veto it, or what's the nuance, or is there a nuance there?
Well, there's a couple of nuances there. One of them is that in order to use that money, the legislature would have to have a 2/3 vote. In other words, 2/3 of them would have to say, okay, go ahead and hit the rainy day fund. That's exactly the same number it takes to override a veto. So there's that nuance to it. The other one is that if Perry says, I'm not going to sign a budget, that's different from I'm going to veto a budget. If he doesn't sign a budget, it goes into law without his signature on it.
So that could be just a bit of political posturing that he's preparing for.
Right.
Okay. Now, I still am not sure I understand why anybody wouldn't want to tap the rainy day fund. I guess except for the possibility that we might need it again in the next 2 years from now.
Well, I guess the governor's first point is that, as long as they don't have money, if you say you can't use the rainy day fund and you can't have new taxes, they have to really, really shake the budget and find everything they can do to cut. And you can always come back in later and say, okay, I think you've done a good job with cutting, we'll go ahead and change our mind. So that's point number one. Point number two is the governor and a lot of other people think that this is more than a one-time problem, that we're going to have a tight budget 2 years from now, and that they ought to save some of the rainy day fund money against that so that we don't get into a predicament like we're in now with no money at all.
And that's not just based on a possibility of a continuing bad economy, but on the imbalance in the structural, what they call the structural imbalance in the taxation.
Right. The Comptroller's office will tell you that, in fact, they've testified to this, that every time we start a new budget, we start $10 billion behind because of promises made in 2006 about the state's fund, the state's share of public education spending.
In order to cut the local taxes. Ross, we're out of time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, we've set up a link to the Texas Tribune website. Just go to klrn.org/TexasWeek.